Okay, so in this video what I wanted to do was show how to install Ubuntu minimally without actually using the installer, and get it using Debootstrap basically, and that will allow you to have a system that is just the command line similar to what it would be if you were installing Arch, and it uses a program called Debootstrap to do that, and it is a provide you with a minimal system. I've done this before, a video similar to this in the past, using the server image. This I'm actually using the default Ubuntu 2404 LTS desktop image. So when you boot it up, this is what you'll be greeted with. It'll ask you, basically how you run through the install, but we're actually not going to install it this way, but we will be able to use the GUI to do this install. So what the first thing I want to do obviously is open up a terminal, and this will make that just a little bit bigger. There we go. And so we'll have a terminal, and this is where we're going to do most of our work from. Just to take a look at my disks here, I am running through a virtual machine. You can ignore all the snap stuff. Here is the disk that I'll actually be using, which it'll be VDA in a virtual machine. Yours will probably be like SDA or something like that. But just pay attention to what disk you're using, because this will, when we get into the formatting, it'll destroy the data on that disk. So the first thing I want to do is get in, just to do a sudo su so that I'm actually in root account. There won't be a password or anything like that. So we're in our root, and I won't have to keep typing sudo. And I want to do cfdisk, and we're going to do GPT because we are going to be using EFI on this system. And my cat just jumped on my printer. Okay, I wish she would quit doing that. So we have our partition. For our first partition, we're just going to do a gigabyte for the EFI partition. That'll be plenty of space for that. And then I'm just going to do a root partition. You can do a swap partition if you really wanted to, but I'm just going to do a EFI and a root partition. And we'll write that, and then we will quit. And what that will provide us with is the partitions. We'll need to actually format them, so that will provide us with those partitions. Now we have to actually provide create the file system on that partition. So we will do makefs vfat on the dev VDA1 to create our EFI partition, and we'll do the makefs ext4. Of course, you can use a different file system if you want, but I'm just using the standard ext4. And we're going to do VDA2, and then that will create our file systems. Now I want to mount these file systems manually, so we're going to mount dev VDA2, the root partition, the root mount. My cats are going absolutely bonkers tonight. We got a lot of storms tonight, so my cats are running around going crazy. So we'll do the mount, and I'm going to take that VDA2, and this is going to be our root partition, and put that in our mount. And then I want to make the directory for my EFI partition, and we're going to mount that under boot EFI, and then we will mount that dev VDA1 into mount boot EFI. Now that should, yes, so now I have them mounted properly. So one of the cool things I'm going to do here, I've got to install the software that I'm going to use to install this minimal system. So first off, I'm going to have to do apt install Debootstrap, and that will give me the software I need for Debootstrap to run. And I also want to install apt install arch install scripts. This will provide me with some tools that will make things a little bit easier for me on chrooting and creating Fstab and all that stuff. It's what's used in Arch, but we're not going to be installing Arch, but it does have some really handy tools that we can use in this type of install as well. Okay, now we can actually use Debootstrap to install the system, and we're going to install that into mount. That is where I mounted the partitions, and Noble is the name of the LTS release that we're using. You can use any version that is supported, so I don't know what the latest interim release is right now, but you can use it. You could probably even use an older LTS if you wanted to, but we're just going to use the current LTS release. And what that'll do is that will basically do like what Fstab does in Arch Linux. This will install the base system, so I'm going to go ahead and let this run. Now it's extracting the files after it has downloaded them, and this usually doesn't take very long. I cut part of that out of the video where it was downloading all the packages, and now it's unpacking all those packages and actually installing it into that partition. Depending on the speed of your system, this generally doesn't take too awful long. You know, again, depending on your internet speed and the speed of your system, this is can take a little bit of time, or it can run fairly quick. Again, it is installing a very minimal system, so it generally doesn't take very long to install. So now that we have the base system completely installed on that partition, what I want to do now is go ahead and create my Fstab for the system so it can boot into those partitions. And that's where the Arch install scripts come in handy. So you can use similar to what you do in Arch, and you can create your GenFS, or you can use Fstab to create your Fstab for your system. And generally I like to just double check it. Just to make sure that it got the partitions correct, and it looks like it did. So we got our EFI partition and we've got our root partition. So the Fstab looks like it's set up correctly. So now I'm going to use Arch chroot to chroot into the actual system. So now we're actually we're chrooted into the actual system, and we're going to have to set up a few things to make this a bootable and usable system. First thing I want to do is I like to go ahead, I believe Nano's already installed. No, it isn't. So we'll need to install a text editor. Let's just go ahead and do, we'll just go ahead and do regular old Vim. But you can do Nano, you can do NeoVim, you can install whatever. But it won't have, well, it might have Vi, but you want to go ahead and install a editor that you are comfortable with using. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to Vim into the apt sources, because we're not going to have everything we need here. This is just has the main, and in Ubuntu, to get all your software that you're going to need the restricted, what is that, universe and multiverse. And that's still not everything, because you're going to want your backports, updates, security updates, and things like that. So what I did is I just copied that, and we want to have security. We want to do the backports, and we want to do the updates. And that will provide us with all the software we need. And you want to go ahead and do an apt update to enable those repositories. And you should actually have quite a few upgrades at this point, because this is an LTS release that's been out for quite some time. So even though this is a point release, it's not going to have an absolute ton, but you see we have 127 packages that can be upgraded. Those are usually security upgrades. So I want to actually go ahead and do that. And if you get any errors complaining about like your locale not set or anything, don't worry about that, because we're going to actually set that in just a minute. But you want to go ahead and let these updates run through. Again, depending on your connection, they may take a while, and depending on how old your ISO is, this may take a while on how many security updates you have coming through. But generally speaking, it shouldn't be too bad, especially if you're using the latest point release of the LTS ISO. It shouldn't have too many. Alright, there we go. We got that up. So like what I was talking about, we want to go ahead and do a depackage reconfigure. Well, let me see so you can see this a little better. I want to do a depackage reconfigure our locale so that we have the locale set up correctly. It's locales, not locale. And this will make sure that you have the correct language, country characters, all that kind of stuff. And this is used for compatibility. So I want to do the English US. It's right here. I'll set that for English US and allow that to go through. Now you want to set up your time zone, and you can do depackage reconfigure TZ data. And I want to do America. I'm going to go into the Chicago time zone. I'm not in Chicago, but that is my time zone. And that way we have our locales and our time zone set up. Now we're also going to need a kernel to boot the system. I like to go ahead and use the hardware enablement kernel because that's going to give you a newer kernel than what is going to be on the original LTS release. So we want to do app install Linux generic HWE. That's the hardware enablement, and this is 2404 because that's the version we're using. You want to go ahead and get your Linux firmware, and that will provide firmware for like video cards, sound cards, things like that that are not necessarily open source, but it'll have the blobs that need to get some of that hardware working. And since we're doing EFI, I want to go ahead and install grub EFI so that we'll have grub to boot our system with. If you're not using EFI, you obviously will use the other grub, but we'll want to use the EFI version of grub. And that should install the latest hardware enablement kernel, which I believe is 6.11 is the latest kernel, I think. Again, after you get the system installed, if you want to install something like XanMod or Licrix or something like that, you can get an even more up-to-date kernel. But usually the hardware enablement kernel is usually new enough for most hardware. Yeah, 6.11, so that's a fairly new kernel. Just going to let that run through and install. And that's installed. Now, to make this bootable, we're going to have to actually install grub to the system. So we want to do grub install, and the EFI directory will be our boot EFI, and then we will do our bootloader ID, and you can name this anything you want. I'm just going to do Ubuntu, and that will install grub, but you're still going to need the configuration file for this to actually work. So I like to go ahead and vim into etc default grub, and I actually don't want the timeout to be hidden. It defaults to that, so I'm going to comment that out. We're not going to be using a splash or a graphical boot, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that and just do the log level 3 for my the information it shows you. It's not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of information when it boots. It'll boot fairly quickly, and it won't give you a ton of information, but anything important it will show you. And then we just do a simple update grub, and that will provide the configuration for the grub so the system can actually boot. But again, before we boot, we need to make sure we have a user installed. So I want to do a new root to do that will be the actual root account's password. And now I want to add a user. This will provide a home folder and everything for this user. You can name it anything you want. My name's Colby, so we're using Colby. And then the groups you want to add it to, I usually add it to sudo so that I can do sudo commands within that group or within that user, which will make that kind of a super user. and audio, video, and input will usually provide all the groups you need. And that's some thunder, and we're getting some storms. Been storming here lately, but hopefully won't lose internet or power. We'll find out. But just a little rumbling. But that should be enough user groups to get get a user account usable. Obviously, if you need to add something else, you can. You can add a different shell if you want, but it'll default to bash, so I'm not worried about that. So there we go, we got our user, and then I want to do the password, or pass WD, to create a password for this account. And that way that user has a password. Now we can actually log into this system whenever we reboot. But there is one more thing I want to do. Ubuntu uses NetPlan by default. I want to actually have it render using Network Manager. So I'm going to apt install Network Manager. I just find that a little easier to set up and use, especially if you're on a minimal system like this and you're going to be using something like Wi-Fi or anything like that. But again, since we're using NetPlan, it's going to have to we're going to have to set NetPlan up to where we use Network Manager. So I'm going to vim into etc NetPlan. And we're going to name this network manager.yaml. And you want to make sure you get all the spacings and everything right here because YAML is a little picky. So I'm going to do network version 2. And I'm going to have the renderer as network manager. And make sure again that's capital N and capital M in network manager. As long as it looks just like this, it should work. And that will provide Network Manager for our system. Now I think I have everything I need for the system to actually boot. So let's see if I've missed any steps. I'm going to go ahead and exit the chroot. I'm going to unmount everything that I mounted. And then I'm going to reboot. Alright, and there we go. This is just a bare minimal install. It booted extremely fast, zipped right in there. And there we go. Just installing fish for fun. But I like the fish shell, but as you can tell, my system is bare minimum. There we go. Now we got the fish shell set up, so we have fish and everything else looking good. And that will provide me with a neofetch. But again, this is just a bare minimal system. There's nothing on here. How I did that is I did the sudo dpackage reconfigure console setup, and you can go through there and set up a larger font. Really, you don't usually need that. That's just for the video so you can see a little better. But there's the neofetch on this minimal install, and as you can tell, there is no snap. So this system is set up bare minimum. Nothing on it, not even snap. So from here you can install whatever you want. You can install Xorg. You can have this just bare bones server. You can have this set up, if you want a window manager like i3 or Sway or anything like that. But like I say, as it stands, there's nothing here. And you can install anything you want. You can get my NeoVim. You can do anything. It's not going to have much set up, but it does have a swap. I don't think it doesn't even automatically do a ZRAM swap, but so you can set all that up if you really wanted to. But this is just a bare bones a bare bones Ubuntu install. And that's it. You know, I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, it's a pretty simple way to set up Ubuntu in a very minimal state if you really want something similar to the way you set up Arch Linux. And you can do that within the GUI using the desktop install image. You can use the interim releases if you want to. If you don't want to use the LTS, be a similar process. And that's pretty much it. And then from here on, you can install whatever you want and set up your system however you want without all the extra bloat or in all that. Even when you install a server system, it installs a lot of extra stuff and bloat. But doing it this way through Debootstrap, it's a very stripped down version that you can kind of build from. Anyway, I do appreciate everybody watching, and like it, subscribe. If you don't, whatever you want to do. I appreciate it. Later on.